My name is Lucille, and the last time I heard my father speak about my grandfather, his words didn't sound human. He's dying anyway. Stop wasting time on him. Then he signed the last document, nodded at the nurse like she was handling a piece of forgotten luggage, and left my grandfather Walter in a nursing home that smelled like bleach and loneliness. That happened just 20 minutes after Grandpa signed over the deed to our family's land, 80 acres of rich, sun-baked soil in Tennessee. A place he had lived his whole life, a place I thought he would die in on his own terms, but instead they dumped him. My mother Joanne stood there too, not crying, not angry, just blank. I watched her fingers tighten around her purse strap. Her eyes drift to the window like she was willing herself elsewhere. She said nothing as they left him. I was the only one who looked back. He was sitting in a wheelchair, eyes still clutching the worn leather-bound notebook he always carried. His hands trembled, but he did not cry. That hurt more. They called it a transition of care, a clean arrangement, legal, efficient. I called it abandonment. I did not speak that day. I stood frozen in the sterile white hallway, hands clenched at my sides, listening to my father talk about subdivision permits, irrigation systems, and estimated value. I was a nurse. I'd seen death. I'd sat with people as they faded. I'd cleaned wounds that would not heal, and whispered comfort to strangers with no one left. But nothing had prepared me for the sound of my grandfather being wheeled away without a goodbye. I went to see him the next morning. He was in a room with peeling wallpaper, a broken curtain rod, and a roommate who coughed all night long. He looked up at me, eyes still sharp. "They took it, didn't they?" he asked. I nodded. I did not lie. He didn't say anything after that, just reached into his cardigan pocket and pulled out his notebook, the one with the cracked spine and ink smudges from years of weather and work. He didn't hand it to me. He just held it tight like it was the only thing left that was still his. That evening, I signed discharge papers and brought him to my apartment. I didn't have space. I didn't have time. But I had something my parents didn't seem to. A memory of the man who once taught me how to plant tomatoes, how to find true north by reading the moss on trees, and how to listen more than I spoke. I brought him home. For weeks he barely spoke. He sat on my porch with a blanket over his knees and his notebook in his lap. Sometimes he mumbled. Sometimes he stared at the sky like it owed him an explanation. And sometimes he just sat there, still as stone. He refused to eat on certain days, said the food tasted like cardboard. He slept in short stretches, always waking with a start. I knew the signs. He was preparing to leave. But I also saw something else in him, attention, like he was waiting for something to happen, or for someone to remember. I didn't know then what he was holding inside that notebook. I didn't know what he'd hidden between the pages, or what he had left behind that would later change everything. I just knew this much. My family had taken everything from him. But Grandpa was not finished. It didn't take long for the routines to settle in. Grandpa would wake before sunrise. I'd find him already sitting in the kitchen wearing the same flannel shirt, notebook tucked under his arm, waiting for the coffee pot to finish. He never asked for much, just a black cup, no sugar, and a moment to sit in the quiet. He still didn't speak often. But when he did, it was always about the land. 80 acres, he'd whisper one morning. 3 generations worked it. Your great-grandfather started with just a mule and a prayer. I knew that land. I'd grown up on it. I'd run through its tall grass, picked strawberries from its southern edge, climbed trees that bent like they were bowing toward the sun. But I hadn't realized how much it meant to him until I saw the way his eyes clouded when he mentioned it. One night, I found him sitting on the porch steps, staring out at nothing. They didn't even say goodbye, he said. Just walked me out like I was a dog too old to bark. I sat beside him, unsure of what to say. I reached for the notebook in his lap, but his grip tightened. Not yet, he muttered. At first, I thought he was just protecting memories. But something in his voice that night, low tense, hinted at something deeper, something unfinished. A week later, a thick envelope arrived at my apartment addressed to Grandpa, but forwarded from his old address. I opened it. Inside were copies of the property transfer notarized and stamped. The land had officially been signed over to Rick, my father. 2.1 million in estimated value, 80 acres of prime real estate on the edge of a newly approved development zone. I stared at the numbers, the signatures, the finality of it all. And I couldn't breathe. I brought it to Grandpa, carefully laying the papers on the table. He didn't look at them, just sipped his coffee and stared past the window. "They waited until I got too weak," he said finally. "Told me it was temporary. Just a signature to protect the estate from taxes." He looked at me, then his eyes glassy but sharp. I believed them. It was the first time I saw regret on his face. Later that night, I called my mother. "It was his choice, Lucille," she said. "We didn't force him. You watched it happen," I replied. "You stood there and let them take everything." A pause. "You think you know better after everything your father has done for this family. Don't turn this into another crusade." I hung up. It wasn't anger yet, it was something colder. Something settling inside me, heavy and still. That weekend, Grandpa had a fall. He didn't break anything, but it shook us both. He'd gotten up in the middle of the night looking for something. When I found him on the kitchen floor, he was muttering, "It's not there. They took it. It was mine." I helped him up, put him back in bed. Then I sat in the kitchen for hours, trying to make sense of it all. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I started researching elder financial abuse. I found statistics, legal precedents, helplines. Most cases never made it to court. Most victims never fought back. And almost none of them had proof. But Grandpa had something. I just didn't know what yet. A few days later, he called me into his room. His voice was thin. "I need you to listen." He handed me the notebook. I held it for a moment, feeling the worn leather, the familiar weight. Then I opened it. The first few pages were poems, short half-rhymed verses about storms and crops and the smell of pine. Then some old sketches of the barn, the old tractor, a tiny handprint labeled Lucille, age 7. And then I found it. Folded neatly inside the back cover beneath a glued flap I hadn't noticed before was a handwritten letter dated 3 years earlier. It was a will, notarized, signed. 2 witnesses, all legal. In it, Grandpa had left the land to me. To Lucille, it read, "Who knows the sound of wind through wheat and the weight of silence when no one else listens? If they take my name, let her hold the ground I called home." I looked up at him, stunned. "Why didn't you tell me? I forgot it was still in there," he whispered. "Or maybe I was waiting for the right time." The original will predated the transfer by a year and had never been revoked, and that changed everything. I brought it to an old friend of mine, Clara, who now worked as an estate attorney. She took one look at the paper, and her eyes widened. "This is valid," she said. "If we can prove he was manipulated into signing the new documents, we can open a case. But you need to be ready. This won't be easy." I was ready. Grandpa sat quietly the entire time, notebook back in his hands, as if he was simply watching a season change. The next step was harder. I had to confront my father. He was standing outside the new construction office, on the edge of the land, already making plans, already dividing up the future. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply said, "You didn't win." He laughed. "I didn't cheat either." The old man signed it. "That's the end of it." "No," I said, "it's just beginning." He didn't laugh after that. Back at the apartment, Grandpa seemed more alert than he had in weeks. "Did you tell him?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded once. That night he asked for his old boots, said he wanted to sit on the porch one more time. We wrapped him in blankets and helped him into the chair. He looked out at the darkness, eyes steady. "I was born on that land," he whispered, "and if I can't die on it, I want my story to stay there." I held his hand. "You're not done yet." He smiled. "No, but they are." The days that followed were quiet, but not peaceful. Grandpa was resting more, speaking less. The will stayed in Clara's possession, stored in a fireproof folder with copies notarized and scanned. I didn't know if it would be enough, but it was something. a truth written in his own hand. I started going through his medical files, looking at the dates, the reports, the medications. And something didn't sit right. His mental clarity on the day of the land transfer had been questionable at best. His primary doctor had been out of town. The exam used to verify his sound mind had come from a clinic in another state, one that Rick's company had done business with years ago. I filed it away in my head as evidence. A puzzle piece. Meanwhile, the silence from my parents' side wasn't really silence. It was pressure. It started with messages. Lucille, don't do this. Your grandfather doesn't know what he's saying. You're just making things harder on everyone. Then came the guilt. You're tearing the family apart after everything we've done for you. He won't be around much longer. Let him have peace. But peace, I realized, had never been part of their plan. Every evening, I would sit with Grandpa on the porch. He'd drift in and out of sleep, his fingers sometimes twitching like he was working an invisible plow. I began to ask questions, not about the land, but about him. What did he want to be when he was young? Why did he stay in Tennessee when his brothers moved to the city? What made him fall in love with Grandma, who passed before I was 10? He told me stories, slow-worn tales about the soil, the way rain used to smell before the roads came, and how silence was something you could either live in or die inside of. I realized I had lived most of my life in silence too. I had been a quiet daughter, a careful wife, and a cautious nurse. My divorce had barely made a ripple because I didn't let it. I had always tried not to cause problems. But this wasn't about peace anymore. It was about dignity, about memory, about giving him back something no one should have been able to take. One evening while I was making tea, Grandpa called me back into the room. I want to record something he said. He looked tired but clear-eyed. What kind of something? My voice, saying what happened, who did it, why. We sat together with my old phone between us. I hit record. He spoke for 15 minutes. Calm, measured, not angry, just true. They said they'd help me avoid taxes, he said. Said it would come back to me after the paperwork cleared. I didn't understand it all. But Rick's a businessman. I trusted him. I shouldn't have. He paused. I didn't want to believe my own son would lie to me. But when I saw the moving truck at the barn before I even signed the paper, I knew. He looked at the phone like it might catch fire from the weight of it. When they took me to that place, I felt like I'd already died. He ended with a line I never forgot. I didn't write my story just to be erased. I uploaded the file to 2 cloud drives, sent it to Clara, and saved it on a USB. One version stayed on the necklace I wore under my scrubs, just in case. That weekend, Clara filed for an emergency hearing to freeze the estate. The court date was 2 weeks away. In the meantime, my mother showed up at my apartment. She didn't knock. She just walked in like she always used to. She looked around like the walls might collapse on her. "Is this really how you live?" she asked. "This place smells like soup and regret." I said nothing. She found Grandpa asleep on the couch, the blanket pulled up to his chin, the notebook beside him. "He doesn't even know what you're doing," she whispered. "He does," I replied. "He asked me to." She sighed. "You're throwing your life away over this. That land is gone. He gave it willingly." "No, he didn't," I said. "He was manipulated. That's called elder fraud." She flinched at the word. "Don't say things you can't take back." "Funny," I said. "That's what you've been doing my whole life." She left soon after. No hug, no parting words. But I noticed her eyes linger on Grandpa's sleeping form before the door closed. 2 nights before the hearing, Grandpa collapsed. It was sudden, quiet. He was walking to the bathroom, then crumpled without a sound. I called the ambulance, hands shaking. I rode with him, gripping the edge of the stretcher, whispering that he was okay, even when I wasn't sure I believed it. At the hospital, the doctor told me he had suffered a minor stroke. "He's stable," she said, "but weak. He might not recover full speech." I nodded, but I felt something crumble. I sat in the room with him, watching machines count his breath, and heartbeats, listening to the hum of life measured by numbers. His fingers twitched once reaching. I took his hand and whispered, "I've got it. I'll finish it." The next day, I printed transcripts of the audio, lined up witnesses, and brought everything to Clara's office. We rehearsed once, then again, And on the morning of the hearing, I wore Grandpa's old flannel shirt under my blazer. No one noticed, but it gave me strength. The courtroom was small, family court, no jury, just a judge with tired eyes, a clerk with fast fingers, and 2 rows of pew-like benches. Rick arrived wearing a tailored suit. Joanne came too, in a pale beige coat and pearl earrings. They didn't look at me. Clara began with the original will, laying it gently on the table. Then the medical report showing Grandpa's cognitive decline. Then the transcript. Then the audio. We played it out loud. Grandpa's voice, quiet but steady, filled the room. I didn't write my story just to be erased. When it ended, you could have heard a pin drop. Rick's lawyer objected, tried to claim mental confusion manipulation. They had a statement from a doctor. Clara countered with proof that doctor had never treated Grandpa. It unraveled fast. By noon, the judge ruled that the current property transfer was under suspicion of fraud and ordered an emergency hold on the land. Rick stood frozen. My mother. She wept silently into a tissue. Outside the courtroom, the sky was gray. The kind of day Grandpa would say meant good planting weather. I went back to the hospital that evening and sat beside him. He was awake barely. He smiled. You did it, he asked. Not yet, I said. But I will. He nodded once, then closed his eyes. I stayed until morning. The hospital called just after dawn. Grandpa had passed in his sleep. There were no machines beeping, no staff rushing in. The nurse on duty said he was peaceful, that he had a faint smile when she checked on him, that he looked like a man who'd finished something important. I sat with his body for almost an hour. I didn't cry, not right away. Grief doesn't always arrive in loud sobs. Sometimes it seeps in like cold air, slow and steady, freezing everything it touches. I touched the old notebook he'd kept near his bed. The pages smelled like pine and coffee. I pressed it to my chest. At home, I opened his closet and found the flannel shirt he wore almost every day. I folded it, then wrapped it around the USB drive with his recording on it. I tied it shut with a thin piece of twine. Then I called Clara. He's gone, I said. She didn't offer condolences, just asked, Are you ready? Yes. The court hearing to settle the estate was scheduled 2 weeks later. That gave Rick's legal team enough time to prepare their counterattack. And they did. They claimed Grandpa's mental decline had started long before the audio recording, that I had manipulated a confused old man to rewrite his wishes in my favor, that the original land transfer had been carefully reviewed, legally approved, and voluntarily signed. They even suggested I might have fabricated the handwritten will, though they stopped short of accusing me outright. The courtroom was different this time, bigger. There were more people, reporters, a few strangers sitting in the back whispering. Maeve, my cousin, and Rick's daughter showed up too. She wore dark sunglasses and didn't speak to anyone. Joanne sat next to Rick, her expression unreadable. When Clara stood to speak, she began with the will, folded and worn but still intact. She passed around copies, then she moved to the recording, the same 15-minute file we'd played before. Only this time we had something else. Grandpa's original signature was authenticated by a handwriting analyst. The same man had reviewed the new property transfer documents and testified that the signature on them showed signs of distress and hesitation, possibly coercion. But the twist wasn't in the signature. It was in the envelope. Before he died, Grandpa had asked me to open a locked box he kept under my bed. Inside was a bundle of old receipts, photographs, and one sealed envelope labeled in his handwriting, "For the judge if they ever try to erase me." Inside the envelope was a photo Rick, standing with a real estate developer, shaking hands beside a sign that read, "Coming soon, Kinsley Estates." The date on the photo was 1 month before Grandpa signed the land over. We submitted it into evidence. Clara turned toward the judge. They claimed this was about simplifying the estate, she said, but the paperwork was prepped before Walter Kinsley even saw the forms, before any doctor cleared him, before any conversation happened. Then she held up the recording again. He trusted his son, but his son had already sold the land in his heart. The judge didn't speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was quiet. I've reviewed the evidence, the testimony, and the timeline, and I find substantial indication of elder coercion and financial fraud. He paused. The original will, written by Walter Kinsley and witnessed before the contested transfer, is reinstated as the controlling document of the estate. All actions taken by Rick Kinsley regarding the property are to be frozen pending further investigation. Rick's lawyer stood up, objecting loudly. The judge banged his gavel once. Motion denied. Joanne looked away. Maeve stared straight ahead. Rick's face didn't move. The courtroom emptied slowly. Clara squeezed my hand once, then left. I walked outside into the cool afternoon. The sky was clearing. I stood there for a long time holding the notebook. That night, I visited the land. The fields were mostly empty now, marked with surveyor flags and rough outlines of roads that had never been built. But the trees still stood. The barn still leaned gently in the wind. And in the far corner, Grandpa's old rocking chair was still under the awning of the storage shed. I sat in it. The wood creaked beneath me, familiar and solid. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, but not broken. Because Grandpa hadn't just left me a piece of earth. He'd left me a truth. And I had spoken it. The next morning, a local newspaper ran a short article, "Court Reinstates Will in Landmark Elder Fraud Case." It didn't mention my name, just Grandpa's. I liked it that way. That same week, I got a letter from the Tennessee Elder Protection Task Force. They were opening a criminal investigation into Rick and his involvement with the developer. Possible charges: coercion, abuse, document tampering, and fraud. I didn't celebrate. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and stood by the window. Across the street, I saw a realtor removing the for sale sign from Rick's front lawn. Later, I got a call from Maeve. She didn't apologize, just said I told him not to push it this far. Then she hung up. That night, I packed a bag. I drove out to the land, slept in the barn on an old mattress, and woke up to the sun rising over the east field. I walked the edge of the property barefoot, just like I used to when I was little. Then I made a decision. The land wasn't mine to profit from. It was mine to protect. 3 months after the court ruling, I turned the land over. Not to a developer, not to a family member, not to the state. To the people who needed it. I partnered with a local nonprofit that served elderly veterans' widows, and those abandoned in the same way Grandpa had been. Together, we converted the house and barn into a residential program called Walter's Porch. No billboards, no TV spots, just a modest sign at the gate and a simple mission: no one should be discarded. I donated the land under one condition: that no one would be turned away for lack of money, family, or name. The soil that had been stolen, nearly erased, would now hold stories again. But this time, stories with second chances. I didn't make speeches. I didn't pose for photos. But I did attend the opening. It was a rainy morning in April, a slow, steady rain. Not a storm, just the kind that soaked in quietly, the kind Grandpa would have called a farmer's blessing. Volunteers stood in raincoats and boots, helping new residents carry in boxes, lay down rugs, put up curtains. The air smelled like wet wood and wildflowers. Near the porch, someone had tied a strip of red flannel to the banister. I didn't know who did it. Maybe no one knew. Maybe it just appeared. But when I saw it fluttering in the wind, I froze. It wasn't the shirt Grandpa wore, but it looked just like it. And for a moment, I could hear his voice. Not the tired one from the hospital bed. Not the quiet one in the nursing home. The voice from when I was 7, helping him stack hay bales. "Don't stop when it's heavy," he'd said. "That's when you know it matters." I stood there for a long while, letting the rain sink into my coat. Someone handed me a mug of black coffee. A woman in her 60s passed by carrying a plant. She smiled at me and said, "Thank you." I nodded. I didn't need her to know the whole story, just the part where she was safe now. That night, I walked through the halls of Walter's Porch. The living room had bookshelves, a fireplace, knitted blankets on every chair. A photo of Grandpa above the mantel, not posed, just candid him on the porch, notebook in hand, the wind tugging at his sleeves. I touched the edge of the frame. "You made it home," I whispered. Later, sitting on the porch steps, I thought about the word family. It used to mean bloodlines, obligation, a closed circle. But now I knew better. Family is who holds you when you fall, not who pushes you off the ledge. It's who fights for your voice when the world tries to silence it. And sometimes family is the one who shows up after everyone else has left. I never forgave my father. I didn't need to. The courts had their say. His business was under federal review. His name was no longer on any title, not even his own home. My mother sent a letter once. I didn't open it. Maeve's name came up in the papers again when she testified in exchange for immunity. I let her go too. None of them followed me out here. And that was fine. I'd spent years thinking healing meant fixing things. But Grandpa taught me something else. Sometimes healing is just choosing not to carry the pain forward, letting it stop with you. That summer, the lilies he planted started to bloom again. And I smiled when I saw them, because now even the flowers remembered.